Don't tell him yet, Eleanor whispered, staring at the glowing ultrasound screen. Not until I know whether all three of them are going to make it. The room went silent. Even Dr. Claire Bennett, a physician who had spent 15 years delivering babies and comforting anxious mothers, seemed unable to find the right words. 3 heartbeats flickered across the monitor. 3 tiny lives. 3 children who had no idea their father had already walked away. Eleanor Brooks blinked hard, trying to clear the tears gathering in her eyes. Just 48 hours earlier, she had signed divorce papers in a downtown office overlooking the Chicago River. Her husband had thanked her for being reasonable. Those had been his exact words. Reasonable. Not brave. Not heartbroken. Not betrayed. Just reasonable. Now she sat alone in a dim examination room, wearing a faded gray sweater and holding the biggest secret of Nathan Caldwell's life. Nathan was a millionaire. His face appeared in business magazines. His company developed luxury properties across the Midwest. People admired him. Investors trusted him. Strangers wanted to be him. At that exact moment, while Eleanor listened to 3 tiny heartbeats echo through a speaker, Nathan stood inside a ballroom nearly 20 miles away, raising a champagne glass beside another woman. The photos would be online before midnight. Smiling. Elegant. Perfect. The kind of images that convinced everyone a fairy tale was unfolding. But fairy tales rarely begin with a woman sitting alone in a medical office wondering if she should tell the father of her unborn children that he had just abandoned an entire future. I need to run the scan again, Claire said softly. I've checked twice already, but I want to be absolutely certain. Eleanor nodded without speaking. She already knew what Claire would find. 3 babies. 3 separate heartbeats. 3 impossible miracles. For a moment, she closed her eyes. She remembered the last conversation she had with Nathan. The polished conference table. The expensive fountain pen. The way he avoided looking directly at her when he said their marriage had simply run its course. As though love had an expiration date. As though 10 years together could be summarized in a single sentence. What Nathan didn't know was that Eleanor had almost canceled that meeting. For 3 mornings in a row, she had woken up feeling strangely exhausted. Food tasted different. Coffee suddenly made her nauseous. But she never had the chance to investigate. Nathan moved too fast. Lawyers appeared. Documents arrived. Decisions were made. And before she could fully understand what was happening, the life she had built disappeared behind a signature. The monitor beeped softly. Claire inhaled, then exhaled. There's no mistake, she said. 3 healthy heartbeats. Eleanor stared at the screen again. She should have felt joy, maybe excitement. Instead, she felt something far more complicated. Fear. Because hidden inside that room was a question nobody could answer. If Nathan discovered the truth tomorrow, would he come back because he loved his children, or because he couldn't bear losing what he had never expected to lose? Outside, snow drifted across the parking lot beneath the gray Chicago sky. Inside, 3 tiny heartbeats continued their steady rhythm, unaware that somewhere across the city, the man who should have been celebrating their existence was preparing to announce a future that no longer belonged to him. 3 weeks earlier, Eleanor Brooks had still believed that difficult seasons eventually passed. She believed silence at the dinner table could be repaired. She believed canceled vacations and late-night meetings were temporary. Most of all, she believed that 10 years of marriage meant something stronger than inconvenience. The illusion shattered on a Thursday afternoon overlooking downtown Chicago. Nathan Caldwell stood beside a wall of glass windows with his hands in his pockets, staring at the skyline instead of his wife. The city below looked frozen beneath a layer of winter clouds. Cars crawled through traffic. Riverboats sat motionless along the water. Everything felt suspended in time except the conversation that was about to change Eleanor's life forever. I think we both know this is not working anymore, Nathan said. His voice sounded calm. Too calm. As though he had practiced the sentence until all emotion disappeared from it. Eleanor studied his reflection in the glass. Not once had he turned around to face her directly. Where is this coming from? She asked quietly. Nathan sighed. Sometimes people grow apart. It was the kind of answer that sounded reasonable until you realized it explained nothing. 10 years reduced to a generic phrase. Eleanor waited for more. An explanation. A confession. A reason. Instead, Nathan remained silent. The expensive office suddenly felt unfamiliar. She had helped decorate it years ago when his company was struggling to attract investors. Back then they had celebrated every contract together. every milestone, every victory. Now she felt like a visitor in a place she once called home. "Is there someone else?" she finally asked. Nathan hesitated, only for a second, but it was enough. Eleanor felt her stomach drop before he even answered. "That is not why we are here." Not a denial, not even close. Outside the window, snowflakes drifted past the glass. Inside, something colder settled between them. 2 weeks later, the divorce was finalized faster than anyone expected. Friends expressed surprise. Family members asked questions. Nathan declined interviews. Eleanor stopped answering phone calls. She moved into a small apartment on the north side of the city and spent her evenings unpacking boxes she never wanted to own. Every room felt temporary. Every silence felt louder. Then came the morning everything changed. She was standing in her kitchen making coffee when the smell suddenly made her nauseous. The mug slipped from her hand and shattered across the floor. Eleanor froze. Her heartbeat quickened. She counted backward in her mind. Dates. Weeks. Missed signs she had ignored during the chaos. 30 minutes later, she sat alone inside a pharmacy parking lot gripping a paper bag with trembling fingers. Snow dusted the windshield. The heater hummed softly. She stared at the digital result for nearly a full minute before accepting it was real. Positive. Her first instinct was disbelief. Her second was laughter. Not joyful laughter. The kind that comes when reality becomes too absurd to process. After everything. After the lawyers. After the signatures. After the goodbye. A child. Later that afternoon, she drove to her appointment, hoping for confirmation. What she received instead was a mystery that would alter every future she had imagined. Because while Nathan Caldwell celebrated his new beginning, Eleanor was about to discover that fate had left him something he never expected. Something impossible to replace. Something worth far more than any company, property, or investment he would ever own. And in less than 24 hours, 3 tiny heartbeats would begin rewriting a story he believed was already over. 3 babies. Eleanor whispered again after Dr. Claire Bennett left the room. The words sounded unreal no matter how many times she said them. 3 babies. Not one unexpected surprise. 3 separate lives growing inside her. Outside the examination room, the afternoon sky darkened as another wave of snow rolled across Chicago. The parking lot lights flickered on one by one. Everything beyond the window looked ordinary. But nothing about her life felt ordinary anymore. Eleanor sat motionless for several minutes, staring at the black and white images Claire had printed for her. 3 tiny shapes. 3 tiny heartbeats. 3 futures that suddenly depended entirely on her. Her phone vibrated on the chair beside her. A text message appeared from her younger sister, Rachel. "How did the appointment go?" Eleanor typed 3 different responses before deleting all of them. She could not explain something she barely understood herself. Instead, she wrote, "Everything is fine. I will call later." The lie sat heavily on her chest. Everything was not fine. Everything was changing faster than she could process. Back across the city, cameras flashed inside the Grand Monarch Hotel ballroom. Nathan Caldwell stood beneath crystal chandeliers surrounded by investors, reporters, and business partners. A string quartet played near the stage while servers carried silver trays through the crowd. The atmosphere felt effortless, polished, successful. Exactly the image Nathan preferred. Beside him stood Sabrina Monroe wearing an elegant emerald dress that quickly became the center of attention. She smiled naturally whenever a camera pointed in her direction. Social media posts began appearing almost immediately. "Congratulations. Beautiful couple. Power duo. Future goals." Thousands of strangers celebrated a story they knew nothing about. Nathan glanced toward the crowd and raised a champagne glass. Applause followed. More photographs. More headlines. Yet for reasons he could not explain, a strange uneasiness lingered in the back of his mind. It had been following him for weeks. Ever since the divorce papers were finalized, he told himself it was stress. Nothing more. But every quiet moment seemed to bring the same question. Why did victory feel so empty? Later that evening, Eleanor returned to her apartment, carrying a small envelope containing the ultrasound photographs. The building elevator creaked as it climbed to the 4th floor. The hallway smelled faintly of fresh paint and laundry detergent. Nothing luxurious. Nothing impressive. Yet the silence felt comforting. She unlocked her door and stepped inside. For the first time since leaving Nathan, she placed her hand against her stomach and allowed herself to imagine the future. 3 cribs. Free car seats. Free birthday cakes. The images felt overwhelming. Then reality interrupted. Medical bills. Childcare. Doctor appointments. 1,000 practical concerns arrived all at once. Her savings account was modest. Her teaching salary covered expenses, but little more. Raising one child alone would be difficult. Raising three seemed impossible. Eleanor lowered herself onto the couch and opened the envelope again. One photograph slipped free and landed on the coffee table. She stared at it. Then something unexpected happened. She smiled. Not because she felt safe. Not because she had answers. But because for the first time in months, her future belonged to her instead of someone else. Across town, Nathan entered his penthouse shortly before midnight. The celebration had ended. The reporters were gone. Sabrina had returned to her own apartment after promising to call him in the morning. The city lights shimmered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Normally, he enjoyed this view. Tonight it felt strangely cold. His phone buzzed with another congratulatory message. Nathan ignored it. Instead, his eyes drifted toward an empty chair near the kitchen island. Eleanor used to sit there every morning drinking coffee before work. The memory arrived without warning. Then another. Then another. Nathan frowned and looked away. He had made his choice. The future was settled. At least that was what he believed. Because while he stood alone staring out over Chicago, three tiny heartbeats continued their steady rhythm, carrying a secret powerful enough to change every decision he thought was already final. "You need to understand something," Dr. Claire Bennett said during Eleanor's next appointment. "A triplet pregnancy is not simply 3 times the responsibility. It can be 10 times the uncertainty." The words followed Eleanor all the way home. Outside, early March sunlight reflected off melting snowbanks lining the streets of Chicago. Winter was slowly losing its grip on the city. Yet Eleanor felt as though she was stepping into a season nobody had prepared her for. Over the following weeks, her life settled into a strange routine. She continued teaching 3rd grade during the day. She graded papers at night. She attended medical appointments more frequently than she ever imagined possible. Every visit brought new measurements, new precautions, and new reminders that her pregnancy required careful monitoring. Claire remained encouraging, but she never hid the truth. Carrying 3 babies demanded extraordinary care. Meanwhile, Nathan Caldwell seemed to be everywhere. His face appeared on business websites. His interviews circulated online. Photos of him and Sabrina Monroe surfaced almost daily. Charity galas, corporate events, luxury restaurants, vacation destinations. Their relationship had become a public spectacle. Eleanor tried not to look. She failed more often than she wanted to admit. One evening, she sat at her kitchen table paying bills when Rachel called. "You saw the article, did you not?" her sister asked. Eleanor closed her eyes. "Which one?" "The engagement rumor." Silence filled the line. Rachel immediately regretted mentioning it. "I am sorry." Eleanor forced a small laugh. "Do not be. It was probably going to happen eventually." But after hanging up, she stared at the dark screen of her phone for a long time. Engagement. The word lingered in her mind. Not because she still wanted Nathan back. That part was fading more each day. What haunted her was how easily an entire chapter of life seemed to disappear. 10 years had become a footnote in someone else's success story. Yet inside her, 3 tiny reminders refused to let that chapter vanish completely. A week later, Eleanor experienced something that changed her perspective. During a routine ultrasound, one of the babies shifted suddenly. Then another. Claire smiled. "There," she said, pointing toward the monitor. "Did you see that?" Eleanor nodded. Tears filled her eyes. For the first time, the babies felt less like an overwhelming responsibility and more like 3 distinct little people. 3 personalities beginning to emerge before they were even born. She left the clinic carrying fresh ultrasound photos and a feeling she had not experienced in months. Hope. Across town, Nathan was struggling with a feeling he could not explain. His calendar was full. His company was thriving. His relationship appeared perfect from the outside. Yet quiet moments increasingly unsettled him. During meetings, he found himself distracted. At night, he slept poorly. Sometimes he reached for his phone intending to call someone before remembering there was nobody left to call. One Friday evening, Sabrina noticed his distant mood during dinner. "You were somewhere else tonight," she said. Nathan forced a smile. "Just work." She accepted the answer, but Nathan knew it was incomplete. Because the truth was harder to define. Nothing was technically wrong, yet nothing felt entirely right either. Back in her apartment, Eleanor placed the newest ultrasound images inside a small keepsake box. Beside them sat the very first scan showing 3 tiny heartbeats. She stared at the collection and made a decision. For now, Nathan would remain unaware. Not out of anger, not out of revenge. She simply needed certainty before she invited anyone else into this fragile future. What Eleanor did not realize was that every passing day was bringing a hidden collision closer. A collision between the life Nathan believed he had chosen and the life waiting quietly for him beyond a secret he still knew nothing about. Dear little ones, today your father walked past me and never even knew you were there. Eleanor stared at the sentence for several seconds before setting down her pen. The notebook resting on her lap had become a ritual over the past month. Every Sunday evening, she wrote a letter to the babies. Not because they could read it. Not because she expected them to understand someday. She wrote because the words needed somewhere to go. Some fears were too heavy to carry alone. Some hopes felt too fragile to say out loud. Outside her apartment window, spring had finally arrived in Chicago. Small patches of green pushed through the last traces of winter. Children rode bicycles along the sidewalk below. Neighbors walked dogs through the courtyard. Life moved forward with quiet determination. Eleanor wished she felt the same certainty. She closed the notebook and gently rested both hands on her growing stomach. The babies had become more active in recent weeks. Sometimes one movement triggered another until it felt like a tiny conversation was taking place beneath her skin. Claire had laughed during the last appointment. "You are already outnumbered," she had joked. Eleanor smiled at the memory. It was becoming easier to imagine them as real people rather than distant possibilities. Yet with every passing week, another question grew harder to ignore. How long could she keep the secret? 2 days later, she received an unexpected answer. At least part of one. The encounter happened entirely by accident. Eleanor stopped at a downtown bookstore after work to pick up a children's novel for her classroom. She was browsing near the front display when a familiar voice drifted across the room. Her heart stopped. Nathan. For a brief moment, she considered leaving immediately. Then curiosity rooted her in place. She glanced toward the cafe section near the windows. Nathan sat at a small table, speaking with a man she recognized from his company. He looked exactly the same. Same tailored suit. Same confident posture. Same effortless presence that once made every room feel smaller. Eleanor quickly turned away before he could notice her. But then she heard something that made her freeze. "The wedding date is almost finalized," the other man said. Nathan nodded. "That is the plan. Wedding." The word landed differently this time. Not because it hurt. Because it clarified something. Nathan was not hesitating. He was not reconsidering. Whatever uncertainty she imagined lingering inside him was not stopping him from building an entirely new future. Eleanor quietly left the bookstore and walked 3 blocks before realizing tears were running down her face. She was not crying for herself. She was crying for 3 children who might grow up never understanding how close they came to being overlooked before they were even born. That night, she opened the notebook again. "Dear little ones," she wrote. "Sometimes people make decisions before they have all the facts. Sometimes they do not realize what they are leaving behind until it is too late. But none of that changes how loved you already are." Across the city, Nathan sat alone in his penthouse reviewing architectural plans spread across a conference table. He should have been focused. Instead, his attention kept drifting toward a photograph tucked between 2 folders. It showed him and Eleanor on a beach vacation years earlier. He could not remember why the picture was still there. He only knew he had never thrown it away. His phone buzzed with a message from Sabrina discussing wedding venues. Nathan stared at the screen, then at the photograph, then back at the screen. A strange feeling settled over him. Not regret exactly. More like the sensation of standing near a door without realizing it had already begun to open. And somewhere beyond that door, 3 tiny heartbeats continued counting down toward a truth that could not remain hidden forever. "Eleanor, I need you to listen very carefully." The expression on Dr. Claire Bennett's face told her everything before a single additional word was spoken. The examination room suddenly felt smaller. The cheerful photographs of newborns hanging on the walls seemed distant. Even the steady hum of the ultrasound equipment sounded different. Eleanor tightened her grip on the edge of the chair. "What is wrong?" she asked. Claire took a slow breath. "The babies are doing well right now. Their heartbeats are strong, but your body is under increasing stress. Carrying triplets always comes with risks, and some of your latest numbers concern me." The room fell silent. Eleanor looked toward the monitor where three tiny figures continued moving. Three little lives completely unaware of medical charts and statistics. Three little lives depending on her for everything. "What happens next?" she asked quietly. Claire folded her hands. "From this point forward, we monitor everything more closely. I need you resting more. Less time standing. Less time working. If anything feels unusual, you call me immediately. Day or night." Eleanor nodded, but her thoughts were already racing. Less work meant less income. More appointments meant more expenses. Every practical worry she had spent months pushing aside suddenly returned at once. Later that afternoon, she sat in her car outside the clinic watching rain slide down the windshield. Spring storms rolled across Chicago, turning the sky dark gray. Her phone buzzed. "Rachel." Eleanor answered immediately. "How did the appointment go?" her sister asked. For several seconds, Eleanor said nothing. Then her voice cracked. "I am scared." It was the first time she had admitted it aloud. Rachel did not offer empty reassurance. She simply listened. Sometimes that mattered more. "You are not doing this alone," Rachel finally said. "Do you hear me?" Eleanor looked down at the newest ultrasound photo resting in her lap. "I am trying." "No," Rachel replied gently. "You are succeeding." That evening, Eleanor returned home exhausted. She heated a bowl of soup, opened her notebook, and began another letter. "Dear little ones, today I learned that courage is not the absence of fear. It is choosing to move forward while fear sits beside you." She stopped writing when a sudden movement fluttered beneath her hand. Then another. Then another. A smile appeared despite everything. Somewhere deep inside, three tiny personalities seemed determined to remind her they were still there. Across the city, Nathan Caldwell sat through a dinner meeting he barely remembered afterward. Investors discussed expansion plans. Numbers filled presentation screens. Opportunities were celebrated. Yet Nathan's attention drifted repeatedly. At one point, a colleague asked for his opinion twice before realizing he had not been listening. "Everything okay?" the man asked. Nathan forced a nod. "Just tired." But that was not the truth. The truth was harder to explain. Over the past few weeks, an uncomfortable feeling had grown impossible to ignore. Every success felt strangely incomplete. Every celebration ended with the same quiet emptiness waiting afterward. Later that night, he stood alone near the penthouse windows watching rain sweep across the city lights below. His phone displayed a wedding planning message from Sabrina. Venue confirmations. Guest lists. Dates. Details. He stared at the screen longer than necessary before locking it again. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the skyline. Nathan could not shake the feeling that something important was approaching. Something hidden just beyond sight. And while he searched unsuccessfully for the source of that unease, Eleanor sat across the city with one hand resting protectively over her stomach, unaware that time was beginning to run faster for everyone involved. Because secrets could survive many things. Distance, silence, even heartbreak, but they rarely survive forever. "Excuse me, sir, I think this belongs to you." Nathan barely looked up when the young receptionist approached his table. He was seated inside a private conference room at St. Matthew Medical Center, waiting for a charity board meeting to begin. His company had funded a new pediatric wing, and hospital administrators wanted photographs before the official announcement. Normally, Nathan enjoyed public events like this. Today, he felt distracted. The receptionist placed a large manila envelope beside him. It was left in the executive conference area. "Your assistant said you were using the room earlier this morning." Nathan nodded absently. "Thank you." He intended to set it aside. Instead, something caught his attention. A familiar name was visible through the transparent address window. Eleanor Brooks. His pulse quickened. For a moment, he simply stared at the envelope. Eleanor's name was not common enough to dismiss as coincidence. He told himself he should leave it unopened. It was not his business. Then he noticed another detail. The document appeared to be a medical file. Concern replaced hesitation. Before he could stop himself, he carefully pulled out the papers. The first page contained routine hospital information. The second page changed everything. Nathan's eyes froze on a single line. Patient, Eleanor Brooks. Estimated delivery, August 14th. His heart began pounding. Delivery. The word echoed through his mind. Delivery. Pregnancy. Eleanor was pregnant. The room seemed to tilt slightly. He scanned further, then stopped breathing altogether. Triplet pregnancy. 3 fetuses. High risk monitoring recommended. Nathan read the sentence once. Then again. Then a third time. Each reading felt less believable. Triplets. 3 babies. His hands trembled. A dozen questions collided inside his head at once. How long had she known? Why had she not told him? When had this happened? Then came the realization that shattered every remaining defense. The timeline matched perfectly. These were not someone else's children. They were his. The conference room suddenly felt impossibly quiet. Outside the glass wall, doctors and nurses moved through the hallway carrying coffee cups and patient charts. Life continued normally for everyone else. For Nathan, nothing would ever feel normal again. He flipped through the remaining pages. Ultrasound reports, appointment schedules, specialist referrals, medical notes, evidence of an entire hidden world existing beyond his awareness. An entire future he had unknowingly walked away from. 3 heartbeats, 3 children, 3 lives. The door opened. Nathan looked up sharply. A hospital administrator stepped inside carrying a folder. Mr. Caldwell, everyone is ready for the meeting. Nathan remained seated. How long ago was this left here? The woman glanced toward the envelope. About 20 minutes ago, I think. Who brought it? One of the nursing staff. There was some confusion with conference room deliveries. Nathan lowered his gaze back to the documents. 20 minutes. Eleanor had been in the building less than half an hour ago. Close enough to touch. Close enough to speak to. Close enough to tell him the truth. Yet he never knew she was there. The administrator studied his expression. Is everything all right? Nathan slowly shook his head. No, it was the most honest answer he had given in months. Minutes later, he walked out of the hospital without attending the meeting. Calls from Sabrina went unanswered. Messages from colleagues remained unopened. Nothing felt important anymore. Not contracts. Not investments. Not wedding plans. As he reached the parking garage, rain began falling from a darkening summer sky. Nathan stood beside his car staring at the medical file still clutched in his hand. For the first time since signing the divorce papers, he understood the true cost of what he had done. And somewhere across the city, completely unaware that the secret had finally escaped, Eleanor sat by her apartment window writing another letter to 3 babies whose father had just discovered they existed. Eleanor Brooks. The voice echoed through the waiting area just as she finished signing a form. She looked up and immediately recognized the man standing near the reception desk. For a second, she thought she was imagining him. Nathan Caldwell looked completely out of place inside the quiet maternal care wing. His tie was loosened. His hair was slightly disheveled. And for the first time since she had known him, he seemed genuinely uncertain. Eleanor's heart skipped, not because she was happy to see him, because she knew exactly why he was there. The secret was no longer a secret. Around them, nurses moved between stations while families sat quietly reading magazines and checking their phones. No one paid attention to the silent storm unfolding between 2 people standing 20 feet apart. Nathan took a cautious step forward. We need to talk. Eleanor stared at him for several moments before answering. How did you find out? Nathan held up the medical folder. The same folder she thought had been safely delivered to her physician. Understanding flashed across her face. Then disappointment. Then resignation. I was going to tell you eventually, she said. Eventually? Nathan's voice cracked slightly. Eleanor, there are 3 babies. The words hung between them. 3 babies. The reality sounded just as overwhelming spoken aloud. Eleanor folded her arms across her chest. And what exactly changes now? Nathan opened his mouth, then closed it again. He had prepared a dozen speeches during the drive across the city. None of them survived contact with reality. Because standing in front of her now, he finally understood something painful. The issue was not whether he knew. The issue was whether she believed he deserved to know. I should have been there, he finally said. For the appointments. For everything. Eleanor looked away. You chose not to be. The sentence landed harder than any accusation. Because it was true. Nathan glanced toward the ultrasound photographs partially visible inside her tote bag. Tiny black and white images. Tiny reminders of months he could never get back. Why did you keep this from me? Eleanor laughed softly. Not because anything was funny. Because the answer felt painfully obvious. When exactly was I supposed to tell you? Before or after you started planning another wedding? Nathan had no response. Silence stretched between them. Then a nurse appeared. Ms. Brooks, Dr. Bennett is ready for you. Eleanor nodded and started toward the hallway. After several steps, she stopped. Without turning around, she said, "You can come if you want." Nathan blinked. "What?" "The appointment." Her voice remained calm. "You wanted to know? Now you can know." 20 minutes later, they sat side by side inside the examination room. Not touching, not speaking, just listening. The monitor illuminated the dim room with a soft blue glow. Dr. Claire Bennett moved the scanner carefully and smiled. There they are. Nathan stared at the screen. One baby moved, then another, then a third. 3 separate heartbeats filled the room through the speakers. Fast, strong, alive. Something shifted inside him at that exact moment. Every contract he had ever signed, every deal he had ever celebrated, every award hanging in his office, none of it compared to what he was hearing now. 3 tiny heartbeats, 3 lives connected to his. Nathan felt his eyes sting unexpectedly. He quickly looked away. Eleanor noticed, but said nothing. For the first time, neither of them knew what came next. The past could not be changed. The future remained uncertain. Yet as the rhythmic sound filled the room, one truth became impossible to ignore. Whether they were ready or not, the lives of 4 people had just collided with his all over again. They are here. The text message appeared on Nathan Caldwell's phone at 3:17 in the morning. He had been awake for hours. Sleep had become nearly impossible during the weeks following his discovery. Every appointment, every update, every conversation seemed to remind him of the same truth. Time was moving forward whether he was ready or not. Nathan grabbed his keys and rushed toward the hospital without even changing out of the sweater he had fallen asleep wearing. Outside, Chicago remained wrapped in darkness. Streetlights reflected across rain-soaked pavement. The city felt quiet, suspended between night and morning. Yet inside St. Matthew Medical Center, everything had changed. By the time Nathan arrived, Rachel was waiting in the family lounge. Her expression softened when she saw him. Not because old wounds had healed, because there were larger things to focus on now. "How is she?" Nathan asked immediately. Rachel smiled for the first time all night. "Tired." Then her smile widened. "But they are all doing well." Nathan closed his eyes. Relief washed through him so suddenly that he had to sit down. For several seconds he said nothing. Rachel handed him a tissue without comment. The gesture was simple, human, necessary. An hour later a nurse appeared in the doorway. "You can come in now." Nathan followed her down a quiet hallway. His heartbeat felt louder with every step. When the door finally opened, he stopped completely. 3 bassinets stood beside the window. 3 tiny blankets. 3 tiny faces. 3 tiny miracles. The room seemed to disappear around them. Nathan moved closer slowly, almost afraid the moment might vanish if he moved too quickly. One baby yawned. Another stretched a tiny hand into the air. The third slept peacefully beneath a striped hospital blanket. Nathan stared in silence. No business achievement, no financial milestone, no public recognition had ever prepared him for this feeling. Tears filled his eyes before he even realized they were there. "They have your nose." Eleanor's voice came softly from across the room. Nathan turned. She looked exhausted but peaceful. For the first time in many months, neither anger nor distance stood between them. Only honesty. Nathan approached her bedside. "I do not deserve your kindness." Eleanor smiled faintly. "This is not about what you deserve." The answer carried more wisdom than accusation ever could. Nathan looked down at the babies again. "I missed so much." "Yes," Eleanor replied gently. "You did." No argument. No denial. Just truth. The room fell quiet. Outside the window, dawn slowly painted the Chicago skyline in shades of gold and silver. A new day was beginning. Nathan sat beside the bassinets for nearly an hour without speaking. He simply watched them, memorizing every movement, every expression, every tiny detail. Eventually, Eleanor reached toward the bedside table and picked up her notebook. The same notebook that had carried months of fears, hopes, and letters. She handed it to him. Nathan looked confused. "What is this?" "Letters," she said. "For them." He opened to the first page. "Dear little ones, today your father walked past me and never even knew you were there." Nathan swallowed hard. Page after page followed. Every milestone, every fear, every hope, every promise. A complete history of moments he could never reclaim. By the time he reached the final letter, his vision had blurred completely. "Dear little ones, someday you will learn that people make mistakes. Some mistakes change everything. But what matters most is what they choose after the mistake. Nathan closed the notebook and looked toward the 3 sleeping babies. For months, he had believed success meant building towers, signing contracts, and winning opportunities. Now he understood how small those victories truly were. Eleanor never returned to the life they once shared. Some chapters, once closed, remain closed. But she never denied her children a father willing to learn. Years later, when people asked Nathan Caldwell what the most important day of his life had been, they expected stories about business deals or career achievements. Instead, he always remembered 3 tiny heartbeats that taught him a lesson money never could. Some people lose everything they value before they understand its worth. He was fortunate enough to discover that lesson, while 3 small miracles still gave him a second chance.